Blood dripped from Dr. Jackson's knuckles as airport security swarmed around him. His daughter Zaria sobbed nearby, her dress torn. The racist guard lay stunned on the floor. "I never meant for this," Jackson whispered, watching as officers approached with handcuffs. Everything had changed in just 12 hours. Before I dive into this shocking story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that like button and subscribe to stay updated on stories of justice and resilience. Now, let's rewind 12 hours to see how a respected doctor and his brilliant daughter found themselves at the center of an airport nightmare that would change airport security forever. The morning sun filtered through the blinds of the Jackson family's spacious Atlanta home, casting golden stripes across the polished hardwood floor. Dr. Terrence Jackson adjusted his tie in the hallway mirror, his mind already racing through the day ahead. At 52, with salt and pepper hair and the confident posture of someone accustomed to making life-or-death decisions daily, he carried himself with a quiet dignity earned through decades of excellence in neurosurgery. "Zaria, sweetheart. We need to leave in 20 minutes, he called upstairs, checking his watch. Today wasn't about him, though. Today belonged to his 17-year-old daughter. "Coming, Dad." Zaria's voice rang from upstairs, followed by the sound of a suitcase zipper. Dr. Jackson smiled, remembering when that voice belonged to a tiny girl who needed help tying her shoes. Now she was headed to a Harvard early admission interview, potentially following his footsteps into medicine but blazing her own trail. His chest swelled with pride. Zaria descended the stairs with her suitcase, a vision of composed elegance despite her youth. Her natural hair was styled in a sophisticated updo, and she wore a conservative navy dress that complemented her deep brown skin. The spitting image of her mother, Amara, but with his analytical mind and determination. "How do I look?" she asked, giving a small twirl at the bottom of the stairs. "Like Harvard's next star student," Dr. Jackson replied, adjusting the collar of her blazer slightly. "Mom would be so proud if she were here instead of that conference in Chicago. She made me promise to FaceTime as soon as we land," Zaria said, checking her phone. Amara Jackson, a successful attorney, had reluctantly left for a major case 2 days prior, after drilling Zaria on potential interview questions for hours. Over breakfast, they reviewed the day's schedule. Flight to Boston at 11, hotel check-in by 3, dinner with an alumni interviewer at 6, and the main interview tomorrow morning at the admissions office. "Remember what we always say," Dr. Jackson said, pouring coffee into his travel mug. Zaria nodded. "Twice as good to get half as far." "I hate that it's still true," he sighed, "but you've already proven yourself exceptional. Valedictorian despite everything at Westlake Academy." Westlake Academy, the prestigious private school where Zaria had flourished academically despite being one of only 27 black students among 600. Dr. Jackson remembered the parent-teacher conference last year when Mrs. Harrington had suggested that perhaps Zaria would be more comfortable at a different school after Zaria had corrected her misstatements about African contributions to mathematics. Or the time Zaria's perfect test score had prompted a classmate to loudly speculate about affirmative action grading. "I just ignore them," Zaria had said after each incident, but Dr. Jackson noticed how she stayed up later studying after every slight, as if determined to become so undeniably excellent that no one could question her belonging. As they loaded luggage into his Mercedes, Dr. Jackson placed a hand on his daughter's shoulder. "Harvard will be different. More diverse, more intellectually honest." "I hope so," Zaria said, her voice carrying a hint of doubt that broke his heart. At 17, she had already developed the double consciousness that all Black Americans eventually acquire, seeing herself simultaneously through her own eyes and anticipating how others would perceive her. The drive to Atlanta International Airport was filled with lighter conversation, Zaria's excitement about seeing the Harvard campus, her nervousness about the interview questions, her hopes of connecting with current students. Dr. Jackson shared stories of his own college interviews, deliberately leaving out how the Harvard interviewer 30 years ago had asked if he really wrote his own application essay. As they pulled into the airport parking structure, Zaria's phone chimed with a good luck text from her mother. Mom says to remember posture and eye contact, she read, smiling. And I say just be your brilliant self, Dr. Jackson added, grabbing their luggage from the trunk. Atlanta International buzzed with the usual Monday morning business crowd. Dr. Jackson noticed the first hint of trouble at the check-in counter. While white passengers moved swiftly through the line, the attendant scrutinized their IDs with unusual intensity, glancing between their faces and documents multiple times. Is there a problem? Dr. Jackson finally asked after the third comparison. Just being thorough, sir, the attendant replied without making eye contact, finally handing back their boarding passes. Dr. Jackson felt the familiar tension in his shoulders, the slight weight that accumulated over a lifetime of such interactions, but he maintained his pleasant expression. No need to cloud Zaria's big day with the shadows that had followed his generation. Today was about her future, her potential, her dreams. All set, he said cheerfully to Zaria, who had been texting her friends about the interview. She hadn't noticed the extra scrutiny, and he was grateful for that small mercy. If only he could protect her from everything. Little did he know what awaited them at security, where Officer Scott Holloway had just begun his shift, already irritated by his supervisor's comments about improving community relations after last month's misunderstanding with a group of Japanese tourists. The security checkpoint sprawled ahead, a maze of tension barriers guiding travelers into multiple lanes. Dr. Jackson guided Zaria toward lane 3, which appeared to have the shortest line. As they joined the queue, he observed the efficient rhythm of the process: shoes off, electronics out, IDs checked, bodies scanned, belongings returned. A mundane airport ritual performed thousands of times daily. Officer Scott Holloway stood at the document check podium, his stocky frame made bulkier by his dark blue uniform. At 48, his once athletic build had softened, though his stance projected authority cultivated over 22 years in security. Deep creases framed his mouth, and his pale blue eyes rarely softened when addressing travelers, particularly certain travelers. What passengers couldn't see was Holloway's personnel file, which contained 3 reprimands for excessive screening procedures, and 2 transfers from other airports following complaints that had been quietly resolved. What they couldn't know was how Holloway's disposition soured each time he received diversity training mandates or read news about police officers being scrutinized for just doing their jobs. When the Jacksons reached the front of the line, Holloway's expression remained impassive as he examined Dr. Jackson's ID and boarding pass. His gaze lingered on Zaria's documentation, however, his eyebrows rising slightly. Harvard, huh, he remarked, the first personal comment he'd made to any passenger that morning. Yes, sir. Interview for early admission, Zaria replied politely. Interesting, Holloway said, marking something on their boarding passes before waving them through to the conveyor belt area. Zaria placed her backpack containing her presentation materials, laptop, and interview portfolio on the conveyor belt. Dr. Jackson removed his watch and belt, following standard procedure. Ahead of them, a white teenage boy approximately Zaria's age passed through with a similar backpack, receiving only a cursory scan. As Zaria's backpack emerged from the X-ray machine, Holloway appeared at the end of the conveyor belt. This bag needs additional screening, he announced loudly. Dr. Jackson, just stepping out of the body scanner, noticed Zaria's confused expression. Is there a problem? He asked, maintaining a cordial tone. Random selection, Holloway replied, though his eyes never met Dr. Jackson's. Please step aside to the screening table. Zaria followed instructions, standing awkwardly at the designated table while Holloway snapped on blue latex gloves with deliberate slowness. Around them, other passengers collected their belongings and continued to their gates, some glancing curiously at the teenage girl being singled out. Holloway unzipped Zaria's backpack and began removing items one by one, laying them across the table with unnecessary force. Her carefully organized portfolio folder opened, sending several printed pages fluttering to the floor. Sir, please be careful, Dr. Jackson said, stepping closer. Those are important documents for her interview. Holloway ignored him, continuing to disassemble the contents of the bag. He picked up a folder containing Zaria's research paper that had won a national science competition. "What's this?" "My research on neuroplasticity in adolescent trauma recovery," Zaria answered, her voice steady despite her growing discomfort. Holloway flipped through it, creasing several pages. "Pretty advanced. You write this yourself?" The implication hung in the air. Dr. Jackson felt heat rising in his chest but maintained his composure. "My daughter is valedictorian of her class," he stated factually. "Her work has been published in student scientific journals." Holloway responded, setting the paper aside carelessly. He pulled out Zaria's Harvard invitation letter. "This looks like it could be modified. We see a lot of fraudulent documents." "That's an official letter from Harvard University's admissions office," Dr. Jackson explained, his professional demeanor intact despite the growing knot in his stomach. "You can call them to verify if necessary." A small crowd of delayed passengers had formed nearby, watching the interaction. Among them was Michaela Washington, a 36-year-old marketing executive who had noticed the escalating situation. She discreetly removed her phone and began recording. "These days anyone can print official-looking letters," Holloway continued, his voice carrying to nearby travelers. "Especially with all these programs for disadvantaged students." He emphasized the word in a way that transformed it from description to accusation. Zaria's shoulders tensed, but she remained silent, having learned early that displaying anger would only reinforce stereotypes about black women being aggressive or difficult. Holloway's hands moved to a small decorative box containing a Kent cloth bookmark, a gift from Zaria's grandmother. "What's this?" he demanded, opening it roughly. "A bookmark from my grandmother. It's a family heirloom," Zaria explained, her voice starting to waver. "Could be hiding something," Holloway muttered, unwrapping the delicate cloth with calloused fingers. "Dar." Jackson stepped forward. "Officer, is this really necessary? My daughter has a flight to catch and an important interview." "Security protocols, sir. Step back or I'll have to call for assistance." Holloway's hand moved meaningfully toward his radio. Dr. Jackson complied, recognizing the veiled threat. He'd navigated enough discriminatory situations to understand when pushing back would escalate matters dangerously. Instead, he pulled out his phone and began recording. Holloway noticed immediately. "Sir, recording security procedures is prohibited." "Actually," Dr. Jackson replied calmly, "TSA policy allows recording as long as it doesn't interfere with screening procedures or capture monitor screens. I'm simply documenting our experience, standing at an appropriate distance." Holloway's face hardened at being corrected. He turned his attention back to Zaria, who stood rigidly as the officer continued his invasive search. "Your hair," he said abruptly. "Excuse me?" Zaria asked, confusion crossing her face. "Your hair. It's quite voluminous. We need to check it." Dr. Jackson stepped forward again. "That's completely inappropriate. My daughter's hair is not a security threat." "It's policy for potential security threats," Holloway insisted, though no such specific policy existed. "Large hair can conceal prohibited items." Around them, white women with similarly sized or larger hairstyles, buns, ponytails, elaborate updos, had passed through security without comment. The double standard was glaringly obvious. "I'd like to speak with your supervisor immediately," Dr. Jackson stated firmly, his doctor's authority evident in his tone. Several passengers nodded in agreement, uncomfortable with the unfolding scene. Michaela Washington, still recording, moved closer. "I've been flying through this airport for 15 years, she said loudly enough for others to hear. "I've never seen anyone's hair searched like this." Holloway's radio crackled. "Supervisor to lane 3, he called, never taking his eyes off the Jacksons. "Difficulty with passengers." As they waited for the supervisor, Zaria whispered to her father, "Dad, we're going to miss our flight." Dr. Jackson checked his watch, concern etching lines around his eyes. The Harvard interview that Zaria had prepared for months, the opportunity they had sacrificed and worked for, was being jeopardized by one man's prejudice. He placed a protective hand on his daughter's shoulder, feeling her tremble slightly beneath his palm. "It's going to be all right," he promised, though uncertainty clouded his voice. "We'll make it through this." Neither of them could have predicted just how wrong he would be. Supervisor Bailey arrived at the screening area with the unhurried pace of someone who had seen it all before. A heavy-set man in his mid-50s with thinning hair and perpetually tired eyes, he assessed the situation with a glance. Dr. Jackson immediately addressed him. "Sir, my daughter and I have been singled out for excessive screening. Our flight leaves in 40 minutes, and this officer is suggesting he needs to search my daughter's hair, which is clearly discriminatory." Bailey barely looked at Dr. Jackson, turning instead to Holloway. "What seems to be the issue, officer?" "Random additional screening, sir. Passenger's bag contained unusual documentation. When I attempted to complete the screening procedure, they became confrontational and began recording." Bailey nodded as if this explained everything. "Sir," he addressed Dr. Jackson, "recording is discouraged as it can compromise security procedures." "With all due respect, Dr. Jackson replied, "TSA's own publicly available guidelines state that recording is permitted as long as it doesn't interfere with screening or capture sensitive monitors. We are well within our rights." Bailey's expression tightened at being corrected. "Officer Holloway is one of our most experienced security officers. If he's determined additional screening is necessary, there's usually good reason. What reason could possibly justify searching my daughter's hair when no one else has received this treatment?" Dr. Jackson challenged, gesturing to the steady stream of passengers moving through other lanes. "Sir, if you continue to obstruct the screening process, we'll have to escort you to a private room for secondary inspection, which will certainly cause you to miss your flight," Bailey warned. "Officer Holloway, proceed with standard pat-down procedure." Zaria's eyes widened in alarm. "A pat-down? But I already went through the body scanner without any alert." "Standard procedure following a flagged bag inspection," Holloway stated, though this wasn't accurate. "Female officer," he called out. A female security officer named Diaz approached reluctantly, having observed the situation from nearby. Unlike Holloway, her expression conveyed professionalism without malice. "Miss, please step over here," she instructed Zaria gently. "Can we move to a private screening room?" Zaria asked quietly, increasingly aware of the stares from passing travelers. "Not necessary for a standard pat-down," Holloway interjected before Diaz could respond. "Do it here." Dr. Jackson stepped forward. "My daughter is a minor. She has the right to request a private screening." "Fine," Bailey sighed, clearly annoyed by the delay. "Officer Diaz, take them to room 3. Holloway, continue with the bag." As Diaz led Zaria toward the private room, Dr. Jackson moved to follow. Only the passenger and female officer, Holloway, blocked his path. "You can wait here." "She's 17 years old," Dr. Jackson protested. "As her parent, I have the right to accompany her during screening." Bailey checked his watch impatiently. "Let the father go, Holloway. Let's move this along." In the small screening room, Zaria stood with her arms extended while Officer Diaz explained the procedure. "I'll use the back of my hands for sensitive areas," she explained professionally. "This should only take a minute." Dr. Jackson stood in the corner, maintaining his composure despite his internal rage. This wasn't the first time his family had faced discrimination, but watching his daughter endure such treatment awakened a primal protective instinct he struggled to contain. His mind flashed back to his own experiences, being pulled over for driving while black in his new Mercedes the day after completing his residency, the patient who requested an American doctor when he entered the room. The real estate agent who mysteriously couldn't show them houses in certain neighborhoods. He had hoped, worked, and prayed that Zaria's generation would face less of this poison. Instead, he was witnessing his brilliant, innocent daughter being humiliated by the same system. "Dad," Zaria whispered, her voice breaking him from his thoughts. "They're going to search my hair." Holloway had entered the room, bringing Zaria's partially repacked bag. "We still need to complete the full screening protocol," he announced with poorly concealed satisfaction. "This is ridiculous," Dr. Jackson stated firmly. "My daughter has natural hair. It's not a security threat." "Sir, either we complete the screening, or you don't fly today," Bailey said from the doorway. "Those are the options." Zaria looked at her father, tears welling in her eyes. "Dad, please," she whispered. "Let's just get through this. I can't miss this interview." The defeat in her voice shattered something inside him. His daughter, who had faced prejudice with such strength and dignity, was being broken down in real time, learning the harsh lesson that excellence wasn't always enough to shield her from bigotry. "Fine," Dr. Jackson conceded, his jaw tight. "But I'm continuing to record this entire procedure." Officer Diaz gently examined Zaria's hair, clearly uncomfortable with the task but professional in her approach. Holloway stood watching with arms crossed, occasionally making suggestions that seemed designed to prolong the humiliation. "Make sure to check the base thoroughly," he directed Diaz. "These elaborate styles can hide all sorts of things." Outside the screening room, a small crowd had gathered, with Michaela Washington still recording. Among the onlookers was James Cooper, a sharply dressed African-American man in his 40s who observed with particular intensity, occasionally making notes on his phone. When they finally emerged from the screening room 15 minutes later, Zaria's carefully styled interview hair was disheveled, and her eyes were red-rimmed from suppressed tears. Dr. Jackson carried her partially repacked bag, its contents now disorganized, her presentation materials creased and out of order. "You're clear to proceed to your gate," Holloway announced loudly, as if he'd successfully prevented a security incident. Dr. Jackson checked his watch, 22 minutes until boarding closed. "Come on," he said gently to Zaria, placing an arm around her shoulders. "We can still make it." As they hurried toward their gate, Dr. Jackson tried to reassure his daughter. "We'll fix your hair before we land. Your documents are still legible. This won't impact your interview." But Zaria remained uncharacteristically silent, her usual confidence visibly shaken. When they were far enough from security, she finally spoke. "Why did he hate us so much, Dad? What did we do?" The simple question, asked with such genuine confusion, broke Dr. Jackson's heart. How could he explain that sometimes hatred needed no justification? That sometimes excellence, dignity, and respect weren't enough? "It's not about us, sweetheart," he finally said. "Some people are poisoned by prejudice. But we can't let them define our worth or limit our future." Zaria nodded, wiping away a tear as they approached their gate. Neither of them noticed that Officer Holloway had made a phone call immediately after their departure, nor that he was now following at a distance, speaking into his radio. The nightmare, it seemed, was far from over. Can you imagine being in Dr. Jackson's position? What would you have done if you witnessed this treatment? Comment number 1 if you believe Dr. Jackson was right to remain calm and record the incident. Comment number 2 if you think he should have been more assertive with Holloway from the beginning. Are there limits to keeping your composure when your child is being mistreated? Like this video if you've ever experienced or witnessed discriminatory treatment in a public space, and subscribe to hear more stories about fighting injustice. What do you think will happen when they reach the gate? Let's find out. Gate B23 buzzed with pre-boarding activity as Dr. Jackson and Zaria approached, breathless from their hurried walk through the terminal. The digital display showed boarding in progress for Flight 1852 to Boston. Relief washed over them. They had made it, if just barely. Zaria ducked into the nearby restroom to attempt to restore her hair while Dr. Jackson joined the line of passengers waiting to board. He pulled out their boarding passes and identification, ready to complete this final step before escaping the nightmare of Atlanta International Airport. When his turn came, Dr. Jackson handed their documents to the gate agent with a tired smile. Cutting it close, he remarked. The gate agent's brow furrowed as she scanned the boarding passes. I'm sorry, sir, but there seems to be an issue with your documentation. She pointed to a red mark stamped on both passes. You've been flagged for additional screening. That's impossible, Dr. Jackson protested. We just went through an excessive screening at the security checkpoint. I apologize, but I can't override this, the agent replied, genuinely apologetic. Let me call a supervisor to assist you. Dr. Jackson stepped aside, texting Zaria to stay in the restroom until he resolved the issue. A sense of dread crept over him as he watched other passengers board while he remained grounded by invisible forces. Well, a familiar voice drawled from behind him. Looks like there might be some documentation irregularities after all. Dr. Jackson turned to find Officer Holloway standing there, a thin smile on his face. The realization hit him like a physical blow. This had never been about security. This was personal. What do you want? Dr. Jackson asked, his voice dangerously low. We've complied with every procedure, no matter how discriminatory. Just doing my job, ensuring dangerous individuals don't board aircraft, Holloway replied loudly enough for nearby passengers to hear. When people get aggressive during screening, it raises red flags. The only aggression here is your targeted harassment, Dr. Jackson countered, struggling to maintain his composure. I'm a neurosurgeon at Atlanta Memorial. My daughter is a 17-year-old honor student with a Harvard interview tomorrow. What possible threat do you imagine we pose? Holloway's expression hardened. Titles don't exempt anyone from security protocols. You people always think the rules don't apply to you. The phrase, you people, hung in the air like a noxious gas. Several nearby passengers shifted uncomfortably, recognizing the coded language of racial animus. I need to speak with your supervisor again, Dr. Jackson stated firmly. Not Bailey. Someone higher. Filing a complaint? Holloway smirked. Good luck with that. I've been here 15 years. Know how many complaints stick? 0. Zaria emerged from the restroom, her hair somewhat restored but her eyes still reflecting the humiliation she'd endured. She approached hesitantly, sensing the tension. Dad? Are we boarding? Before Dr. Jackson could answer, Holloway turned his attention to her. Actually, miss, we have some questions about your documentation. The Harvard letter you're carrying doesn't look authentic. Zaria's face fell. But it is authentic. I can call the admissions office right now. Or maybe your father called in some favors, Holloway continued, his implication clear. We all know how these special admissions work. Dar. Jackson stepped between Holloway and his daughter. That's enough. My daughter earned her interview through academic excellence, not connections. Her credentials are impeccable. Dad, Zaria whispered, her breathing becoming rapid and shallow. The plane, they're finishing boarding. Indeed, the gate area had nearly emptied as the final boarding call echoed through the terminal. Dr. Jackson felt panic rising within him, not for himself, but for Zaria. This trip represented years of hard work, dreams, and determination. The interview wasn't just about college admission, it was about proving she belonged in spaces that historically excluded people who looked like her. As he tried to flag down another gate agent, memories of Zaria's previous experiences with discrimination surfaced. He remembered finding her crying in her room after a teacher had accused her of cheating on a test because no one scores perfect marks without help. He recalled how she'd hidden the racist comments on her science fair project social media posts, not wanting to make a big deal about it. Each time, she had picked herself up, worked harder, pushed further, a child forcing herself to be superhuman just to be treated as human. He had taught her to navigate racial bias with dignity, to be strategic rather than reactive. But watching her now, panic attack building as her future slipped away due to one man's prejudice, he questioned whether his guidance had been wisdom or capitulation. Sir, Dr. Jackson addressed a different gate agent desperately, we've been deliberately delayed by this officer. My daughter has a critical interview tomorrow morning. Please, we need to board." The gate agent looked sympathetically at Zaria, whose breathing had become visibly labored. "Let me see what I can do," she offered, picking up a phone. James Cooper, the well-dressed man who had observed the security checkpoint incident, approached the counter. "Excuse me," he said to the gate agent, "I've been watching this situation unfold. This family is being harassed." He discreetly showed her an ID card that Dr. Jackson couldn't see. The gate agent's demeanor changed immediately. "Yes, sir, Mr. Cooper. Let me expedite this." Holloway stepped closer, blocking the counter. "This is a security matter. You can't override security protocols." "Actually," Cooper began, but was cut off by Holloway's radio crackling to life. "All officers, be advised we have a situation at Terminal C. Available personnel report immediately," came a dispatcher's voice. Holloway hesitated, clearly torn between responding to the call and continuing his harassment. "You should go," Cooper suggested firmly. "Sounds important." With a last glare at the Jacksons, Holloway backed away. "This isn't over. I'll be logging these irregularities in the system." He turned and walked a few steps before stopping and spinning back. "Oh, and miss," he addressed Zaria, "Harvard might want to know about your father's aggressive behavior today. Universities care about character, after all." Zaria's eyes widened in fresh panic. Dr. Jackson felt his daughter's future being threatened explicitly now. Everything he had worked for, everything she had earned, was being wielded as a weapon against them. "Final boarding call for Flight 1852 to Boston," announced the gate agent. "Final boarding call. Please," Dr. Jackson implored. "We need to be on that flight." The gate agent nodded. "You're clear to board, Dr. Jackson. Quickly, please." Relief flooded through him as he guided Zaria toward the jet bridge. They were almost there, almost free of this nightmare, when Holloway suddenly reappeared, moving with surprising speed for his build. "Stop right there," he commanded, physically positioning himself in the jet bridge entrance. "Security override. These passengers are grounded pending documentation verification." "On what grounds?" Cooper demanded, having followed them to the gate. "Potential falsified documentation and security risk," Holloway replied, his hand moving to rest meaningfully on his belt. Zaria, overwhelmed by the escalating situation and her increasing panic attack, stumbled slightly. Holloway, perhaps seeing an opportunity, stepped forward quickly. In the confusion, his arm made contact with Zaria, causing her to lose balance. She fell against a metal stanchion, the sound of fabric tearing cutting through the tension as her dress caught on a protruding bolt. "Dad," she cried out, more from shock than pain. Something primal awakened in Dr. Jackson as he saw his daughter, his brilliant, gentle daughter, sprawled on the floor, her interview dress torn, tears streaming down her face. In that moment, he wasn't Dr. Terrence Jackson, respected neurosurgeon who had navigated white spaces with careful precision for decades. He was simply a father witnessing his child being harmed. The control he had maintained throughout this ordeal, the measured responses, the strategic documentation, the dignified restraint, all of it shattered like glass. For Zaria, for every indignity she had suffered, for every time she had hidden her pain to appear professional or reasonable, for every moment she had been forced to be twice as good for half the respect, Dr. Jackson had reached his breaking point. Have you ever witnessed someone pushed beyond their breaking point? Comment number 1 if you believe there comes a time when calm diplomacy must give way to direct action. Comment number 2 if you think maintaining composure is always the better approach, no matter the provocation. What would you have done in Dr. Jackson's position, watching your child be deliberately humiliated and now physically affected? Like this video if you believe systemic racism requires both documentation and confrontation to create change, and subscribe to follow more stories of justice and resistance. What do you think happened next? Did Dr. Jackson sacrifice everything to protect his daughter? Let's continue. Time seemed to slow as Dr. Jackson processed the sight of his daughter on the ground, her dress torn, dignity shattered. The carefully constructed walls of professional restraint, built over decades of navigating predominantly white spaces, crumbled in an instant. "Don't you touch her," he roared, lunging forward to help Zaria to her feet. The terminal fell silent, all eyes drawn to the confrontation unfolding at gate B23. Holloway stepped back, his hand moving to his radio. "Sir, calm down immediately or what?" Dr. Jackson interrupted, his voice carrying the authority that commanded operating rooms. "You'll continue harassing a minor? You'll fabricate more reasons to abuse your power? You'll further jeopardize my daughter's future because of your prejudice?" Passengers who had been boarding froze in the jet bridge, watching the scene unfold. Others pulled out phones, sensing the gravity of the moment. "Dad, please," Zaria whispered, clutching her torn dress, tears streaming down her face. "It's not worth it." But her words only fueled his indignation. That his brilliant daughter had been conditioned to believe standing against injustice wasn't worth it, represented everything wrong with the system they navigated daily. "It is worth it," Dr. Jackson responded firmly, though he modulated his tone. "You are worth it. Your dignity is worth it." He turned back to Holloway. "We've complied with every legitimate security measure. We've endured harassment and humiliation. Now you physically interfered with my daughter, causing her to fall. This ends now." Holloway's face darkened. "Are you threatening an officer, sir?" "I'm demanding basic human dignity and equal treatment under the law," Dr. Jackson clarified, pulling out his phone. "And I'm documenting every second of this interaction. Phones away during security procedures." Holloway barked, reaching for Dr. Jackson's device. "Don't touch my property," Dr. Jackson warned, stepping back. "You have no legal right to confiscate my phone for documenting misconduct." Holloway's face contorted with rage at being challenged. "I said, hand over the phone." He lunged forward, grabbing Dr. Jackson's wrist with unnecessary force. "Let go of me," Dr. Jackson stated calmly but firmly, aware that dozens of cameras were now recording. "You're assaulting a passenger." Instead of releasing him, Holloway tightened his grip and attempted to twist the phone free. When Dr. Jackson resisted, Holloway escalated, shoving him against the wall of the jet bridge entrance. The physical contact crossed a line. Dr. Jackson, though not a violent man, had spent his youth in boxing gyms before medical school consumed his life. Muscle memory took over as he deflected Holloway's grip with a swift movement, creating distance between them. "Do not put your hands on me again," he warned, his voice deadly calm. Holloway's eyes widened with a combination of shock and something darker, almost satisfaction, as if he'd been waiting for this moment. "He's resisting. I need backup at gate B23, he shouted into his radio, lunging forward again. This time, Holloway grabbed Zaria's arm as she attempted to step between the men. "You're both being detained. Let go of my daughter," Dr. Jackson demanded, watching Zaria wince in pain. When Holloway didn't comply, continuing to grip the teenager's arm while reaching for his restraints, Dr. Jackson acted on paternal instinct. He delivered a precise push to separate Holloway from Zaria, using just enough force to break the officer's grip without causing harm. The push, though controlled, caught Holloway off balance. He stumbled backward, tripping over a carry-on bag abandoned by a startled passenger, and fell hard against the counter. The impact knocked the wind from him temporarily, leaving him gasping on the floor. Alarms blared throughout the terminal. Red lights flashed as Holloway had triggered his emergency button during the fall. Within seconds, security personnel flooded the area, weapons drawn, responding to what the system registered as an officer down. "Hands up!" On the ground now, they shouted at Dr. Jackson, who immediately complied, knowing the danger of the situation. "He attacked me," Holloway wheezed from the floor, already crafting his narrative. "Became violent during routine screening. That's a lie. Zaria cried out, still clutching her torn dress. My dad was protecting me. Officer Holloway made me fall and then grabbed me. The security team, trained to protect their own, ignored her protests. 2 officers forced Dr. Jackson face down on the terminal floor, roughly applying handcuffs while pressing a knee into his back, despite no resistance from him. You're hurting him. Zaria sobbed, attempting to reach her father but held back by another officer. Blood dripped from Dr. Jackson's knuckles. Not from striking anyone, but from the abrasion of being forced against the rough terminal floor. The same skilled hands that performed delicate brain surgeries were now scraped and cuffed behind his back. Michaela Washington pushed through the growing crowd, still recording. Everyone see this, she called out. They've been harassing this family for over an hour. The officer caused this. James Cooper approached the security team supervisor who had just arrived. I'm Senior Vice President of Operations for Delta Airlines, he stated authoritatively. This is an excessive response to a situation your officer created. I've witnessed the entire incident from security checkpoint to here. The supervisor hesitated, sensing the situation might be more complex than initially reported. Sir, we're responding to an officer down call. Protocol dictates. I understand protocol, Cooper interrupted. I also understand liability. Every second of this incident has been recorded by multiple passengers. Your officer has been engaging in clear discriminatory behavior. Throughout the chaos, Dr. Jackson remained silent, eyes locked with his terrified daughter. The flight to Boston continued boarding around them, the Harvard interview slipping away with each passing minute. Dad, Zaria whimpered, what happens now? Despite his prone position, handcuffed on the floor, Dr. Jackson summoned the calming voice he used with frightened patience. It's going to be okay, sweetheart. Truth prevails. Call your mother. As airport police arrived to take charge of the situation, separating Holloway and Dr. Jackson, the reality of their circumstances crystallized. The trip was ruined. The interview was missed. And Dr. Jackson, who had spent a lifetime navigating around bias to build his career and protect his family, now faced potential assault charges for defending his daughter. Holloway, now recovered and standing with assistants, pointed dramatically at Dr. Jackson. That man attacked a federal officer. I want him prosecuted to the fullest extent. The charges would be against a TSA contracted security officer, not a federal officer, corrected a newly arrived airport police sergeant, and will need statements from all witnesses before determining charges. There are dozens of witnesses, Michaela Washington interjected, still recording. And we all saw the same thing, discrimination, harassment, and abuse of power. As Dr. Jackson was helped to his feet, still handcuffed, he caught sight of the departure board. Flight 1852 to Boston showed departed. With it went Zaria's Harvard interview, and seemingly, her future. Blood continued dripping from his knuckles, a physical manifestation of the price paid for standing against injustice. In 12 short hours, they had gone from celebration to devastation, all because one man decided they didn't deserve equal treatment. I'm sorry, Zaria, he said softly as officers prepared to escort him away. I'm so sorry. Through her tears, Zaria straightened her shoulders, a gesture so reminiscent of her mother that it nearly broke him. Don't apologize for protecting me, Dad. Ever. As Dr. Jackson was led away, he heard Zaria on the phone, Mom. Something terrible has happened. Dad's been arrested. We need help. The nightmare had only just begun. The airport holding room smelled of industrial cleaner and stale coffee. Dr. Jackson sat alone at a metal table, his handcuffs finally removed but the abrasions on his wrists still stinging. Through a small window in the door, he could see Zaria sitting in the waiting area, hunched over her phone, likely updating her mother on their deteriorating situation. The door opened, and a plainclothes officer entered with a folder. Dr. Terrence Jackson, he read. Neurosurgeon at Atlanta Memorial. No criminal record. Multiple humanitarian awards. And now facing potential assault charges. He looked up. I'm Detective Ramirez. Want to tell me what happened? I'd prefer to wait for legal representation, Dr. Jackson replied calmly. Smart, Ramirez nodded. Though the situation's complicated. We have about 20 different passenger videos circulating already. Your daughter's given her statement. Officer Holloway is demanding charges. Dr. Jackson remained silent, years of professional discipline serving him well despite his inner turmoil. His primary concern wasn't himself but Zaria. Her Harvard interview, the opportunity she had worked toward for years, was now impossible. How would this affect her future? Her confidence? Her belief in the system? The door opened again, and a tall black man in an impeccable suit entered. I'm Attorney Dominic Wallace, he announced, addressing both men. I'll be representing Dr. Jackson. Detective Ramirez raised an eyebrow. That was fast. I was in the terminal, Wallace explained. Witnessed the entire incident. Detective, may I have a moment alone with my client? After Ramirez left, Wallace sat across from Dr. Jackson. Dr. Jackson, I'm a civil rights attorney. I specialize in cases of discrimination and police misconduct. What happened to you and your daughter today was textbook racial profiling. How did you know to come here? Dr. Jackson asked. Ms. Washington, the woman who was recording, is a friend of a client. She contacted me immediately. Wallace pulled out his phone. Have you seen what's happening online? He showed Dr. Jackson a social media feed where videos of the incident were spreading rapidly. Hashtag Justice for Jacksons was trending, with thousands of comments expressing outrage at their treatment. Your daughter's quite impressive, Wallace continued. She's given 3 interviews already, articulating exactly what happened with remarkable composure. She's making sure your side of the story is heard. Despite everything, pride swelled in Dr. Jackson's chest. Even in crisis, Zaria showed the strength and intelligence that defined her. Now, Wallace continued, we have several developments. First, James Cooper, the man who intervened at the gate, is actually a senior vice president for airline operations. He's launched an internal investigation into security procedures. Second, Officer Holloway has a documented history of similar complaints that were buried. And third, your wife is landing in 30 minutes. She's bringing the firm's litigation team. For the first time since the ordeal began, Dr. Jackson felt a glimmer of hope. Amara was coming. His brilliant, fierce wife would know exactly how to navigate this nightmare. What about Zaria's interview? He asked, the missed opportunity still weighing heavily. Ms. Washington has connections at Harvard. She's already reached out to the admissions office explaining the situation. They've expressed willingness to reschedule. Wallace leaned forward. Dr. Jackson, this isn't just about clearing your name anymore. This incident has exposed a pattern of discrimination that's been deliberately concealed. A knock at the door interrupted them. Detective Ramirez returned with another man, Airport Security Director Thomas Reynolds. Dr. Jackson, Reynolds began awkwardly, we've reviewed preliminary footage from multiple sources. While the investigation continues, we've determined there's insufficient evidence to hold you further. You're free to go, though we'll need you to remain available for questioning. Dr. Jackson exchanged glances with Wallace, who nodded slightly. Thank you, Dr. Jackson responded, standing. Outside, he found Zaria surrounded by an impromptu support team. Michaela Washington, James Cooper, and several other passengers who had witnessed the incident and stayed to offer statements supporting the Jacksons' account. Dad! Zaria rushed to embrace him. Despite everything, she looked stronger than when he'd last seen her, like someone who had discovered her own voice. We've got a situation brewing, Cooper informed them. Multiple witnesses have come forward with similar experiences involving Officer Holloway. Ms. Washington's posts have gone viral. The airport administration is getting hammered with calls. And he hesitated, checking his phone. Someone's uncovered Holloway's social media history. It's not pretty. What do you mean? Dr. Jackson asked. Michaela Washington showed him her tablet. Private accounts linked to Holloway show connections to several white supremacist groups. He's been posting racially charged content for years while working in a position of authority. The revelation sent a chill through Dr. Jackson. How many others had suffered under Holloway's discriminatory practices? How many didn't have the resources or witnesses to fight back? Dr. Jackson, Cooper addressed him formally, on behalf of the airline, I want to express our deepest apologies for your experience. While the security checkpoint isn't under our direct control, we contract with the airport authority and have significant influence. I've already spoken with our CEO, who wants to personally ensure this situation is addressed properly. Before Dr. Jackson could respond, a commotion near the security office entrance drew their attention. Amara Jackson had arrived, a force of nature in a perfectly tailored suit, flanked by two junior attorneys carrying litigation folders. Her eyes scanned the room, locking onto her family with laser focus. Dr. Jackson felt a weight lift from his shoulders. Amara had always been his strength, brilliant, strategic, and utterly fearless in the face of injustice. If anyone could navigate this situation, it was her. Terry, she embraced her husband before turning to Zaria. Baby, are you all right? I'm okay, Mom, Zaria assured her, standing taller. I've been making sure everyone knows what really happened. Amara's expression shifted from concern to fierce pride. That's my girl. She turned to Wallace. Dominic. Thank you for stepping in. What's our status? As Wallace updated her, Dr. Jackson observed the growing coalition forming around them. What had begun as isolated discrimination had catalyzed something powerful, strangers united against injustice, using their various positions and skills to demand accountability. Reynolds approached again, looking increasingly uncomfortable. Mrs. Jackson, we'd like to discuss resolution options. Perhaps somewhere private? Amara's expression could have frozen lava. There's nothing to discuss privately. My husband and daughter were publicly humiliated and discriminated against. My husband was wrongfully detained. Any resolution will acknowledge those facts fully and publicly. We're prepared to offer compensation and... With a confidentiality agreement, no doubt, Amara interrupted. Not interested. What we want is accountability and systemic change. Reynolds paled. Mrs. Jackson, there are complex liability issues. Which is precisely why you should be concerned, she countered. Because we're not just pursuing individual accountability for Officer Holloway. We're looking at the airport authority that hired him despite documented complaints, the security company that promoted him, and the supervisors who enabled him. While this exchange continued, Cooper pulled Dr. Jackson aside. There's something you should know. We've obtained the surveillance footage from the entire incident, including angles the public cameras didn't capture. It clearly shows Holloway deliberately causing your daughter to fall, then fabricating his account afterward. Can we use that evidence? Dr. Jackson asked. It's being secured now. And Dr. Jackson? Cooper lowered his voice. The airline wants to make this right. We've arranged for a private flight to Boston tonight if Zaria still wants to make her interview. Harvard Admissions has agreed to a special session tomorrow afternoon. For the first time since the ordeal began, Dr. Jackson felt tears threatening. After everything they'd endured, Zaria would still have her chance. She wouldn't have to pay the price for standing against injustice. The holding area had transformed into an impromptu command center. Michaela Washington coordinated social media responses with several prominent civil rights activists who had reached out. Wallace and Amara strategized legal approaches with their team. Cooper arranged transportation and accommodations. And at the center of it all stood Zaria. No longer just a victim but an emerging advocate, articulating her experience with clarity and purpose to a reporter who had arrived at the scene. "This isn't just about what happened to us," she explained maturely. "It's about a system that enables people like Officer Holloway to abuse their authority based on racial bias. How many others has he targeted who didn't have the resources or witnesses we had? That's why we can't stay silent." Dr. Jackson watched his daughter with awe and admiration. In the midst of trauma, she had found her voice, stronger and more purposeful than before. Perhaps this crucible, painful as it was forging something powerful within her. A security official approached with news, "Officer Holloway has been placed on administrative leave pending investigation. The airport director would like to meet with you." Amara exchanged glances with Wallace. "We'll meet, but not alone. Our legal team, Mr. Cooper, and Ms. Washington will join us." As they prepared for this critical meeting, Dr. Jackson pulled Zaria aside. "Are you sure you're up for continuing to Boston tonight? After everything that's happened, no one would blame you for needing time." Zaria straightened her shoulders, a determined gleam in her eyes. "Dad, remember what you always taught me? When they try to shut the door, don't just knock, build a new entrance." This wasn't just about getting into Harvard anymore. Now it's about showing everyone what happens when you stand up to injustice. Dr. Jackson embraced his remarkable daughter, realizing that today's nightmare had revealed something powerful, not just about the prejudice still poisoning American institutions, but about the coalition of allies ready to stand against it, and about the extraordinary strength his daughter possessed. Together, they walked toward the director's office, no longer just victims seeking redress, but advocates demanding change. Backed by a growing movement that had started with one family's refusal to accept discriminatory treatment as normal. The battle was far from over, but for the first time since Officer Holloway had singled them out, Dr. Jackson felt something unexpected: hope. The airport director's office, a spacious room with panoramic views of the runways, felt crowded with the assembled group. Director Patricia Lowry, a thin woman in her 60s with a perpetually worried expression, sat behind her desk flanked by the airport's legal counsel and public relations director. Across from them sat the Jacksons and their rapidly assembled coalition of supporters. "First," Director Lowry began, "let me express my sincere apologies for your experience today." "With all due respect," Amara interrupted, her voice carrying the precision of 20 years in courtrooms, "we're not here for apologies. We're here to discuss specific actions the airport authority will take to address not just our situation but the systemic issues it represents." Lowry's expression tightened. "Mrs. Jackson, we take these allegations very seriously." "They're not allegations," James Cooper interjected, sliding a tablet across the desk. "Here's timestamped surveillance footage showing Officer Holloway deliberately causing Zaria to fall, then fabricating his report. And here," he swiped to another video, "is footage of him singling out the Jacksons while allowing similarly situated white passengers to proceed without additional screening." The airport's legal counsel, a nervous man named Peterson, leaned forward. "We're prepared to offer a generous settlement package including a non-disclosure agreement, I presume?" Dominic Wallace asked, though he already knew the answer. "That's not happening." "Then what exactly are you seeking?" Lowry asked, frustration evident in her tone. Amara opened a folder and slid a document across the table. "This is our proposed remediation framework. It includes a public acknowledgement of the discriminatory treatment, immediate suspension of Officer Holloway pending full investigation, implementation of anti-bias training for all security personnel, establishment of an independent oversight committee for discrimination complaints, and financial compensation for the emotional distress and missed opportunities my family suffered." Peterson scanned the document, his expression darkening. "This is extensive and would set problematic precedents." "The precedent was set when you hired and retained an officer with documented discriminatory behaviors," Wallace countered. "We're offering a path forward that addresses institutional failures rather than just individual misconduct." While the attorneys continued their strategic dance, Dr. Jackson observed his daughter. Zaria sat straight back beside her mother, taking notes and occasionally whispering suggestions. The traumatized teenager from hours ago had transformed into a focused young advocate. Despite everything, pride swelled in his chest. There's also the matter of the criminal allegations against Dr. Jackson, Peterson noted, attempting to regain leverage. Michaela Washington, who had been quietly monitoring social media on her tablet, looked up. You might want to reconsider that position. Hashtag Justice for Jacksons has been mentioned over 200,000 times in the past 3 hours. 46 civil rights organizations have issued statements of support. And CNN is running the story at the top of the hour. On cue, everyone's phones buzzed with a breaking news alert. Lowry checked her device and visibly paled. Furthermore, Cooper added, the airline has already issued a statement supporting the Jackson family and announcing a comprehensive review of our security contractor relationships. The power dynamics in the room had shifted dramatically. What the airport authorities had likely expected to be a straightforward settlement negotiation had transformed into a reckoning. We need time to review these demands, Lowry finally said. Of course, Amara replied coolly. But be advised that we've scheduled a press conference for 9 a.m. tomorrow. We'd prefer to announce collaborative remediation efforts rather than initiated litigation. As they exited the meeting, Dr. Jackson felt a strange combination of exhaustion and exhilaration. The system that had so often silenced victims of discrimination was being forced to listen, not just because of who they were, but because of the coalition that had formed around them. You were magnificent, he told Amara as they walked toward the airport's executive lounge where Cooper had arranged private space for them. I'm just getting started, she replied, the fire in her eyes reminiscent of when they'd first met in law school. No one does this to our family and walks away unscathed. In the lounge, they regrouped to plan their next steps. Cooper confirmed the private flight to Boston would depart in 2 hours, giving Zaria time to prepare. Wallace and his team continued building their legal strategy, now incorporating the surveillance footage. Michaela coordinated with civil rights organizations that had reached out offering support. Amara pulled Dr. Jackson aside. There's something you should know. The hospital board called. His heart sank. Let me guess, they're concerned about the publicity. Some are, she admitted. Bradford and Winter specifically suggested you take a leave of absence until this blows over. Dr. Jackson wasn't surprised. Bradford and Winters had always been uncomfortable with his advocacy for more diversity in the neurosurgery department. They preferred black excellence that remained quiet and grateful. But, Amara continued with a slight smile, Dr. Chen called an emergency meeting of the full medical staff. They're voting now on a resolution of support. And 3 of your patients' families have contacted the media about how you saved their loved ones' lives. Before he could respond, Dr. Jackson's phone rang, Dr. Sarah Patel, Chief of Surgery. Terrence, she said when he answered, I'll be brief. The medical staff just voted unanimously to support you. Your surgeries will be covered through Friday, but we expect you back on Monday, preferably having forced some overdue changes at that airport. And if Bradford or Winters give you any trouble, remind them that I have detailed notes from last year's holiday party. Relief washed over him. His professional community, the colleagues he'd worked alongside for 15 years, were standing with him rather than distancing themselves. Across the lounge, Zaria was speaking with a Harvard admissions representative on Michaela's phone. Her expression shifted from anxiety to cautious optimism. They're convening a special interview committee tomorrow at 2, she reported after ending the call. Dean Wallace specifically said they're impressed by how I've handled this situation. Of course they are, Dr. Jackson said, embracing his daughter. You've shown more poise and courage today than most adults do in a lifetime. As final preparations for their Boston flight began, Attorney Wallace approached with a tablet. You should see this. He showed them a news segment featuring a group of airport employees standing together before cameras. We've worked with Officer Holloway for years, a security supervisor named Rodriguez stated. Many of us have witnessed his discriminatory behavior but feared retaliation if we reported it. Today's incident was the final straw. We're coming forward as a group to share documentation of systematic racial profiling. The coalition was growing beyond what any of them could have imagined. What began as one family's traumatic experience was catalyzing a movement for accountability and change. Dr. Jackson, Cooper called from across the room. "There's someone here you should meet." He introduced a tall black man in his 60s, Bernard Thompson, the airport's incoming chief of security operations, scheduled to take over next month. "Dr. Jackson," Thompson said, shaking his hand firmly. "I've spent 30 years working to reform security protocols from inside the system. What happened to your family today represents exactly why I took this position. If you're willing, I'd like your input on the changes we implement going forward." As they discussed potential reforms, Dr. Jackson realized something profound was happening. Their strategic response, refusing silence, building coalitions, demanding systemic change rather than individual concessions, was creating ripples far beyond their individual case. When it was time to depart for their flight, the Jacksons were escorted through a private security entrance, bypassing the main terminal where media had gathered. As they walked, Zaria slipped her hand into her father's, a gesture she had outgrown years ago but that now felt right. "Dad," she said quietly, "remember when you told me that sometimes we have to be strategic about which battles we fight?" "I do," he replied, recalling the many difficult conversations they'd had about navigating discrimination. "I think I understand now," Zaria continued thoughtfully. "Being strategic doesn't mean staying silent. It means fighting effectively, building the right coalition, choosing the right ground, and demanding the right changes." Dr. Jackson squeezed his daughter's hand, tears threatening his composure. In the midst of this ordeal, Zaria hadn't just maintained her dignity, she had discovered her power. As they boarded the private jet to Boston, he realized that while the day had begun with the promise of Zaria's future at Harvard, it was ending with something perhaps even more valuable: her emergence as a powerful advocate for justice, surrounded by allies committed to creating change. The battle was far from over, but they were no longer fighting alone. Dawn broke over Boston as Zaria rehearsed her Harvard interview responses in the hotel suite. Despite everything that had happened, her focus had returned, perhaps even sharper than before. Dr. Jackson watched from the doorway, marveling at his daughter's resilience. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Stronger," she replied without hesitation. "Yesterday changed something in me, Dad. I'm not just pursuing Harvard for myself anymore. I'm thinking about all the people who never got the chance because of discrimination they couldn't fight." His phone buzzed with a news alert: breaking. Airport security officer suspended after viral discrimination incident. Amara, already dressed and working on her laptop, pulled up the full story. Holloway's been placed on administrative leave pending investigation. His union initially issued a statement of support, but they're backpedaling after the surveillance footage leaked. "Who leaked it?" Dr. Jackson asked, surprised. "Not us," Wallace confirmed, joining them for the strategy breakfast they'd scheduled. "My guess is one of the security employees who came forward. The important thing is that the narrative can't be controlled anymore." The story had indeed exploded overnight. National news networks were running special segments on discrimination in security screening. Social media campaigns had identified dozens of individuals with similar experiences at Atlanta International. The airline had announced a comprehensive review of security practices across all their hubs. "There's something else," Amara said, her expression serious. "Bradford from the hospital board called. They've called an emergency meeting for this afternoon." Dr. Jackson's stomach tightened. Despite Dr. Patel's support, hospital politics were complex. The board, primarily concerned with donor relationships and public image, might still view him as a liability. "I should fly back," he began, but Amara shook her head. "Absolutely not. Zaria's interview is the priority. I've arranged for Dr. Chen to represent your interests at the meeting. Plus," she added with a slight smile, "I've had interesting conversations with 3 of the hospital's largest donors who were appalled by your treatment and have promised to make their opinions known to the board." While they finished breakfast, Wallace's phone rang. His expression changed as he listened, eventually putting the call on speaker. "Dar. Jackson," came a woman's voice. "This is Sandra Mills, Deputy Director of TSA Operations for the Southeast Region. I've reviewed the Atlanta incident and would like to personally apologize for the discriminatory treatment your family experienced. More importantly, we're implementing an immediate review of all complaints filed against Officer Holloway and any supervisors who dismissed them." After the call ended, Wallace explained, "This is significant. Federal oversight means the airport can't just handle this internally anymore." As they prepared to leave for Zaria's rescheduled Harvard interview, Michaela Washington called with an update on the public response. The video of the incident had been viewed over 12 million times. Civil rights organizations had announced a joint investigation into patterns of discrimination at major airports. Several celebrities and political figures had publicly supported the Jacksons. "It's not just about us anymore," Zaria observed, adjusting her freshly pressed blazer. "We've become a catalyst for something bigger." At Harvard, they were received with remarkable consideration. The admissions committee had been fully briefed on the situation, and Dean Wallace himself greeted them at the entrance. "Ms. Jackson," he said, shaking Zaria's hand, "your grace under pressure has already impressed this committee. Today is simply an opportunity for us to know you better." While Zaria proceeded to her interview, Dr. Jackson waited in a quiet courtyard, reflecting on the whirlwind of the past 24 hours. His phone buzzed constantly with updates. Holloway's social media history had been exposed, revealing connections to white nationalist groups. The airport authority was facing mounting pressure from multiple directions: public opinion, corporate partners, legal challenges, and now federal oversight. A text from Dr. Chen delivered unexpected news. "Board meeting concluded. Not placing you on leave. Instead, voted to issue statement supporting you and establishing new diversity initiative in your name." Bradford and Winters outvoted 11-2. Relief washed over him. His professional standing remained intact, strengthened, even, by colleagues who recognized the importance of standing against discrimination rather than avoiding controversy. When Zaria emerged from her interview 2 hours later, her expression told him everything he needed to know. Eyes bright, shoulders back, smile confident, she had transformed the trauma into triumph. They asked about the incident, she reported as they walked across Harvard Yard. "Not just what happened, but how it affected my perspective on justice and institutional responsibility. I told them I learned more about systemic change in 24 hours than most people learn in years." Dr. Jackson wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "I'm so proud of you, sweetheart." Dean Wallace said something interesting, Zaria continued. He said Harvard doesn't just want students who excel academically, they want people who will use their education to improve broken systems. He said my ability to articulate the difference between individual bias and institutional discrimination showed exactly the kind of analytical thinking they value. Back at the hotel, they joined a video conference with their growing support team. Amara had coordinated legal strategies with civil rights organizations to address the broader patterns of discrimination rather than just their individual case. Wallace reported that 3 more security officers had come forward with documentation of Holloway's history of targeting minorities. Cooper confirmed that the airline was implementing immediate changes to their security contractor requirements. The airport director called, Amara informed them. They're preparing a settlement offer that includes most of our demands. Public acknowledgement, policy changes, anti-bias training, and an independent oversight committee. What about the NDA? Dr. Jackson asked. Removed from consideration, Amara confirmed with satisfaction. They've realized containment isn't an option anymore. Their best strategy now is to position themselves as part of the solution. As the call continued, Dr. Jackson received a text from an unexpected source, Officer Diaz, the female security officer who had conducted Zaria's pat-down with visible discomfort. Dr. Jackson, I submitted my testimony today about what I witnessed. Officer Holloway has been intimidating staff for years, especially those of us who objected to his profiling. Thank you for standing up when so many of us couldn't. Many of us are with you, even if we couldn't show it that day. The power had shifted. What began as one family's humiliation had catalyzed a movement for accountability that transcended individual cases. The institutions that had enabled discrimination now faced a coordinated response from multiple directions: legal, corporate, media, public, and internal. That evening, as they prepared for a national television interview Michaela had arranged, Zaria asked a question that cut to the heart of their experience. "Dad, if Officer Holloway hadn't pushed me, if you hadn't been forced to defend me physically, would anyone be listening? Would anything be changing?" The question haunted him because he knew the answer: probably not. Their story had gained traction precisely because it escalated to physical confrontation, because there was dramatic footage, because Dr. Jackson's professional status made him credible to audiences who might otherwise dismiss racial profiling complaints. The system shouldn't require trauma porn to recognize injustice, he finally answered. But now that people are listening, we have a responsibility to ensure the changes benefit everyone. Especially those without our resources and platform. Zaria nodded solemnly. That's what I want to focus on in the interview tonight. Not just what happened to us, but what happens every day to people whose stories don't go viral. As they prepared for the camera crew's arrival, Dr. Jackson marveled at his daughter's transformation. The traumatic experience hadn't diminished her, it had catalyzed a powerful sense of purpose. She wasn't just a Harvard applicant anymore, she was becoming an advocate who understood how to leverage privilege and platform for systemic change. The battle was far from over. Holloway would likely fight the allegations. Some would attempt to paint Dr. Jackson as the aggressor. Institutional change would face resistance from those invested in the status quo. But something fundamental had shifted. The coalition they had built, spanning racial and professional lines, incorporating legal expertise, media savvy, corporate influence, and grassroots organizing, had created momentum that couldn't easily be contained or dismissed. As the camera lights set up in their hotel suite, Dr. Jackson remembered Zaria's words from that morning: "I'm not just pursuing Harvard for myself anymore." Whatever happened next, his remarkable daughter had already learned perhaps the most important lesson: true excellence isn't just about individual achievement, it's about using your position to create space for others. The red light on the camera illuminated, and their story, now a catalyst for broader change, reached another audience. The power had shifted, and systems that had operated in shadows were now exposed to the disinfecting power of sunlight. 6 months later, Dr. Jackson stood at the podium in Atlanta International Airport's main terminal, addressing a crowd of reporters, airport officials, security personnel, and community members. Behind him hung a large banner reading, "The Zaria Standard, Security with Dignity and Respect for All." "Today marks not the end of a journey, but the beginning of a transformation," he stated, his deep voice carrying across the hushed crowd. "What happened to my family 6 months ago exposed systemic failures that affected countless travelers. But today, we celebrate the commitment to meaningful change." Beside him stood Zaria, poised and confident in a crimson Harvard sweatshirt. At 18, she carried herself with the assurance of someone who had discovered her purpose. To their right stood Amara, who had spearheaded the legal framework for the airport's new accountability systems, and Bernard Thompson, the new chief of security operations who had accelerated reforms upon taking office. The changes being unveiled were substantial. Airport security would now operate under the Zaria Standard, a comprehensive protocol requiring documentation of all secondary screenings by demographic data, regular analysis for potential bias patterns, body cameras for all officers, clear complaint procedures posted in multiple languages, and mandatory quarterly anti-bias training. Most significantly, an independent oversight committee comprising civil rights attorneys, security experts, and community representatives would review all discrimination complaints and publish quarterly transparency reports. 6 months ago, Officer Scott Holloway's actions represented the worst of a system that enabled bias to operate unchecked, Dr. Jackson continued. Today, he is permanently removed from security positions and facing civil penalties for documented pattern of discrimination. What he didn't mention was how Holloway had attempted to spin the narrative in his favor, appearing on certain news programs claiming he was being sacrificed to political correctness, and that he was just doing his job. Those efforts had collapsed when 7 of his former colleagues testified about his history of targeting minorities, and the discovery of his social media accounts revealed explicit racial animus. But this isn't about punishing one individual, Dr. Jackson emphasized. It's about transforming systems that allowed such behavior to continue unchecked for years. It's about ensuring that security and dignity aren't treated as mutually exclusive. As he spoke, Dr. Jackson reflected on the unexpected paths their lives had taken since that fateful day. The hospital board that had initially considered him a potential liability had unanimously appointed him chief of neurosurgery after his principled stand generated overwhelming support from colleagues and patients alike. He had used this platform to address discrimination in healthcare delivery, establishing new protocols for ensuring equitable treatment. Zaria had received her Harvard acceptance letter with a personal note from the dean, acknowledging her extraordinary poise in converting adversity into advocacy. She had deferred enrollment for 1 semester to establish the Zaria Jackson Foundation, which provided legal support for victims of discrimination who lacked resources to fight back. James Cooper had implemented system-wide changes across multiple airports where his airline operated, establishing new standards for security contractor selection and oversight. Michaela Washington had leveraged her marketing expertise to become an influential civil rights activist, helping organizations craft effective messaging for institutional change campaigns. Most surprisingly, several security officers, including Officer Diaz, had formed an internal advocacy group committed to reporting discriminatory practices without fear of retaliation, protected by new whistleblower protocols. "I want to acknowledge someone whose courage made much of this possible," Dr. Jackson said, gesturing toward Michaela Washington in the front row. "When Ms. Washington chose to record what was happening to us, she wasn't just documenting an incident, she was creating accountability. Without her willingness to stand as a witness, this transformation might never have occurred." Michaela nodded in acknowledgement, her eyes reflecting the emotion of the moment. What had begun as an instinctive response to injustice had evolved into a dedicated movement for change that she now helped lead. After the ceremony, Zaria was approached by a young security officer who had been watching from the back of the room. "Ms. Jackson," he said hesitantly, "I was in training when your incident happened. I watched the other officers and did nothing. That day changed me. I almost quit, but instead decided to stay and be part of the solution." He extended his hand. "Thank you for forcing us to be better." This unexpected encounter embodied everything the Jacksons had fought for, not just punishment for wrongdoing, but transformation of the systems and people within them. Later that afternoon, in a quiet moment before their flight home, Zaria showed her father a draft of her orientation speech for Harvard's incoming class. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened," she explained. "About how one moment of injustice exposed so many others, and how standing up created space for change that benefits thousands of people we'll never meet." Dr. Jackson read her powerful words with growing pride. His daughter had transformed a traumatic experience into a platform for advocacy that would shape her academic journey and beyond. The speech wasn't just about what had happened to her, it was about the collective responsibility to challenge unjust systems rather than simply navigating around them. "When they tried to humiliate us," Zaria had written, "they didn't realize they were actually showing us our power." 1 year after the incident, Zaria walked confidently through Atlanta International Airport, headed home for spring break. The changes were visible everywhere, from the clearly posted complaint procedures in multiple languages to the diverse security staff wearing body cameras to the "Dignity in Security" posters featuring bias awareness information. She paused at Gate B23, the spot where everything had escalated, now unrecognizable from that day. A small plaque on the wall read, "Site of the 2024 incident that led to the implementation of the Zaria Standard for Equitable Security Practices nationwide." As she continued to her gate, several security officers nodded respectfully, recognizing the young woman whose name had become synonymous with reform. One stopped her briefly. "Ms. Jackson, just wanted you to know, I was trained under the new standards." makes all the difference in how we approach our work. Thank you. Zaria smiled, remembering her father's words from a year ago, "It's not about us anymore." And it wasn't. What began as one family's stand against discrimination had catalyzed changes affecting millions of travelers. The Zaria standard was being adopted at airports across the country. Their lawsuit had established legal precedent for holding institutions accountable for enabling discriminatory practices. The foundation they established had already helped 12 families fight similar battles. Dr. Jackson watched his daughter board her flight home, his heart swelling with pride. He recalled Zaria's words from her Harvard acceptance speech, "Sometimes justice requires us to stand firm when the world expects us to back down." She had done exactly that, transforming a moment of trauma into a movement for change that would outlast them all. As her plane taxied away, Dr. Jackson reflected on how differently this airport visit had ended compared to a year ago, not with handcuffs and humiliation, but with dignity and the knowledge that sometimes, standing against injustice creates ripples that become waves of transformation. Have you ever witnessed discrimination that made you want to stand up and take action? What would you have done in the Jackson family's position? The courage to confront injustice often comes at personal risk, but as this story shows, it can lead to meaningful change that impacts countless others. If this story moved you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more powerful narratives about standing up against discrimination. Share this video with someone who needs to understand the importance of being an ally when witnessing injustice. Thank you for listening to this story of courage, resilience, and transformative justice. Remember, change begins when someone refuses to accept things as they are. The Jackson family's ordeal teaches us that confronting racism requires both individual courage and collective action. While Dr. Jackson's instinct to protect his daughter was natural, it was the strategic coalition building afterward that created lasting change. True transformation happens when we move beyond individual incidents to address systemic problems. The story reveals how institutions often protect discriminatory practices until exposed to public scrutiny. It demonstrates that documentation, through recordings, witnesses, and testimonies, creates irrefutable evidence that forces accountability. Michaela's decision to record became as powerful as Dr. Jackson's physical defense. We learn that the most effective response to discrimination combines multiple approaches: legal action, media pressure, internal advocacy, and policy reform. The Jackson family succeeded because they refused to accept monetary compensation in exchange for silence. Perhaps most importantly, Zaria's journey shows how traumatic experiences can be transformed into purposeful advocacy. Rather than allowing discrimination to diminish her, she channeled it into creating protections for others. Her evolution reminds us that standing against injustice isn't just about personal vindication, it's about creating systems where such injustice becomes impossible.